You want to feel like you've been heard and understood and that companies are giving you exactly what you want. Personalization is the business tool that can make this happen. Unfortunately, personalizing content is not as simple as installing software and hitting the start button. It requires lots of user research and a strong understanding of how to model and organize your content. For the past couple of decades, Noz Urbina has been listening to users and building the adaptive systems that power content personalization.
Welcome to the Content Strategy Insights podcast, where accomplished content strategy experts share their wisdom with our friends in the content community. We talk with professionals who work across the span of content strategy, from small businesses to big enterprises, from content design to content marketing, from solo consultancies to huge agencies. Our mission is to democratize content strategy, to make its principles and practices accessible to everyone. And now, here's your host, Larry Swanson.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to episode number 85 of the Content Strategy Insights podcast. I'm really happy today to have with us Noz Urbina. Noz is the founder of Urbina Consulting. He runs the Omnichannel X conference, and he's also a faculty member at at Graz University, where he teaches in the Content Strategy Master's program in their University of Applied Sciences in Graz. So welcome, Noz. Tell the folks a little bit more about yourself and what you're up to there at Urbina Consulting.
Hello, Larry. So I have been a content strategist for coming on 19 years now. I was kind of in the original guard, I would say, of the omnichannel, multi-format, multi-channel crew. I was very lucky to get into this game straight out of university and kind of be taken under the wing of some pillars of the industry, Anne Rockley, Scott Abel, Rahel Bailey. I could go on and on. I was very lucky in my early career with the peers who were around me, and that was a very enjoyable ride. I started my own consultancy about 6 years ago, and then we founded the Omnichannel Conference 2 years ago. So next year will be our third year. We're working on dates and plans as we speak for the Omnichannel Conference. And that keeps me very entertained. Let me put it that way.
I went to the conference. I've completely lost track of time, but somewhere in the last couple months, it seems like I was at Omnichannel X and really enjoyed it. So,
great.
Thanks for doing that. What I want to talk to you about, like you said, you're the Omnichannel guy, but you're also like really well known for personalization. And that's what I really want to focus on that today, because personalized content, first of all, it seems kind of overhyped in some circles. So I would love to get to the reality, kind of some myth busting around personalization, but also what it takes for a content strategy practitioner to consider all the things that go. It's a complex enterprise, and I'd love to kind of give folks a feel for if they're thrust into a personalization exercise, enterprise of some kind. Give them a fighting chance at doing what you do every day. So tell me, well, first of all, what is personalization? It seems like there's you if you customize your profile on a new site and then you start to see different content because of that. But that's just like the tip of the iceberg, right? Can you talk a little bit about the various manifestations of personalized content?
Thank you for framing it in that way, because I think that a lot of the problem in the discussion about personalization is due to people kind of not understanding what is meant when we use that word, because they're like anything that has any artificial intelligence component these days, it kind of gets almost blown up into being magic. There's and also, I think one of the great pains in the whole content and marketing and content strategy UX world is that whatever the discipline or area is gets associated with its most obvious, loudest first implementations. So when people think of personalization, they think about creepy follow you around algorithms or ads, or maybe recommendation algorithms like an Amazon, you might also like this product kind of thing. Whereas when personalization is done well, people don't even notice it's happening. So I like to say generally that relevance is personalization under another name. So anytime you are considering your audience and actually building content that is particular for sub-segments of your audience rather than your audience as one monolithic block, you're going down the personalization route. It's not to be confused. Personalization is not to be confused or made synonymous with algorithmic or artificial intelligence methods, although those can play a role. So what I like to recommend people to do is start from the basics. Get back to your fundamentals. Who are our target personas? What information do they need? When do they need it? And why might they need different information in this subsegment versus this subsegment? And if we made that difference, what difference would that make along their journey? So that's getting it back to the fundamentals, not of algorithms and technologies and recommendation engines, which the vendor community and the technology community would love to make this all about. Get back to the things that content people know: audience, purpose, goals, and so on, moving people along their journey.
Yeah, and and that gets into, like, I love that we can start at the start, that UX focused kind of customer centric look at this. Like, okay, what do you need? Where are you likely to be in your journey? Can you talk a little bit about your methods? I know I've heard you talk before about how important journey maps and persona development are. Can you walk through just a kind of a high level overview of like how you approach a new project like that, like how you discern what those users might need?
Yeah, so we start, and I think another thing to kind of reassure people is that even in my work, which tends to be with the larger multinational kind of organizations, even in the kind of projects I do, you can do this on roll. Like you don't have to have 100K of a user research budget to develop your personas just to get started. You can do this pretty much tailored to the level and size of your project or your organization's need. So first, it's figuring out who those people are, however you want to name them. I like working from well-researched, well-thought-out personas. If that's not available to me on a project, and we have to move forward, in a do or die situation, we'll say, okay, well, let's move forward with these roles that we have. And we know that we have, for example, the technical influencer, and we have the budget holder, and we have the executive, and then we have the user. So let's say we have those 4 roles. Or if I'm in medical devices, we might have a maintainer, an in-house support person, a nurse, and a doctor. So we have 4 other roles. So what are the roles? Then start figuring out their informational needs, so their tasks or their objectives. What are they trying to accomplish? If we don't have a lot of budget for this real persona research to get into underlying emotional goals and so on, then we're just looking at tasks. What does that role have to do? We know that they have to do this. That's their job. And then from those tasks, my whole methodology for customer journey mapping is about breaking down questions over time. So you take a scenario. I'm a nurse, and I've got a patient's come in, and I've got a new machine that I'm working with, and I don't know how to do this procedure, and I've got 5 minutes to figure it out. So that's a scenario. Or I am responsible for evaluating new billing packages for my company. So I'm going to research all the SaaS software options on the market and develop my short list. So you take a role and you take a scenario and you say, okay, so what would that person ask? What would they ask first? And then what questions do those questions then lead to along the journey? So customer journey mapping, I often see it done as a kind of arts and crafts project where you're trying to basically, you create this kind of these like different smiley faces, and you just create this arc over time, and it says website, newsletter, etc. I hate those with a deep passion, because that's not useful to me as a content creator or as someone who's trying to plan out personalization to really do anything. So the customer journey map for me is it does have that emotional arc, but the thing that I need to know is, what does this person need to know at what stage along the process? And that's where I can say, okay, well, this kind of person, they get really focused on this information at this stage. So are we providing that? Are we providing that in a way that is accessible to them when they're in that situation at that time? So are we surfacing it proactively, or do they have to go hunting for it? And is it different than the other personas?
Yep.
And that's it. So once you've kind of worked that out, you can start doing content personalization. You can do it with pen and paper if you wanted to and mail it out to people. But you figured out who you're changing things for, what the value add is, and what the end goal is you're trying to support.
Right. So always, I love that. That's just the highest level user focus you could have, because I think so many journey mapping projects start with like, well, hey, we want them to be doing this at this point. It's all product and company focused rather than user focused. So yeah, I appreciate it. So that's great. So, and one of the things I've heard you say elsewhere about the benefit of doing it that way is that there's some like what we call in the biz stakeholder alignment stuff going on there, that like if you're building these maps, there's some real power in there of being able to communicate with your various folks that you have to deal with in this. Can you talk a little bit to that?
Yeah, absolutely. That's one of my favorite parts, and this has really was career changing for me. As you know, but as many of your listeners might not, I started originally in technical documentation, and I made the transition to general content strategy, and then more of focused on marketing content strategy, and now really omni-channel to say that I'm working with policies groups and technical documentation, marketing, getting ready for chatbots, whatever people need. And customer journey mapping was instrumental for me, because what I found was none of the people who bring me into a project are working everywhere, and they don't have the perspective necessary to kind of figure out a customer journey map the way that I was asking them. So I was saying, so what does their process look like? Where are they trying to get to? And so why are you writing this? Because that's, for me as a content strategist, the emphasis is on the strategy, not on the content. So I'm going, do you need that piece of content? Does this need to exist? Where can we cut? How can we make it more concise, more trim, more optimized? Like, think about it, I think about content the way that Apple thinks about design. What is the stuff that they need to do their task, and how do we optimize the experience around that, but with words. So I'm always looking for, what can we shave off, what can we smooth, what can we round, what can we make cleaner? And they would go, well, I don't know, we publish that because that's what we've always published, or well, that's what the executive thinks we need to publish, or that's what the head of product management told us to publish. And so the customer journey mapping kind of forced them to do was go around the houses in the different departments and also talk to some customers and try to map that journey out. And inevitably, there would be this incredible kind of aha moments that would happen when these people would be in the room together and put their perspective in one bucket and swish it around. There was an understanding of the customer, which would sort of suddenly take a leap forward in the team overall and how they interact. And then people would start, taking each other's emails and book follow-up meetings with each other, and these bridges would be built that would help the company operate better. All because we were just asking, what information should we be writing for people
at that point? I love that, because that's the classic content strategy problem, is silo busting. And this, if this is a method that does that, boom, I think a lot of people would start approaching that way. There's so much in what you just said, so many details to be worked out after that. For example, like, I think you're kind of betraying your roots in technical content, because this is so baked into you. I'm worried I might have to like extract this out of you. This notion of working with like modularized, atomized content, because you were just describing the front end of that, well, all the customer needs and stuff. Deep underneath there, we need content that's organized in a way that you can fulfill those needs. Tell me a little bit about that leap from that outside customer-facing thing down to the whatever your content repository looks like, or how you put that together.
Yeah. So I actually, and it's funny because I started with this back to front because what I used to do is that people would invite me in as a content modeler to help them build their structures, build their content models, do their information typing and content typing, and get that into their content management system. And I would, I'd come in and say, all right, so let me look at your content. What are you trying to do? They say, we want to do this. We want this to appear over here. We want to reuse that over there. I'd say, great. And we'd model that all that up. And it was as I got into the customer journey mapping process and over time seeing how that didn't perform in the long term, that I said, okay, we have to do this customer journey mapping part because you're rushing along to get the CMS launched or relaunch the site or get the, whatever published. And because we're not doing the basics, which is designing from user requirements and real understanding of the audience, it's never coming out right. And that's, not kind of my fault because I'm doing what you asked me to do and what you paid me to do. So what these two processes have in common is the question. So the piece of content is driven by a question. So you have a question that someone's going to ask at some point. Now that might be answered on a phone, in a chatbot, in an app, in print, via a sales rep or a trainer or a customer support person or a field service person, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, a partner via the extranet. There's all these ways that the actual asker might get this response. So what we want to do is we want to be very flexible and say, all right, no matter who's asking this response now is a reusable thing. And we want to make that self-contained. We want to say, okay, well, this is probably useful for these kind of people in these kind of situations, but we've created it with an open future. Each question has a response, and that's either becomes a little module of content, or it becomes a block within a reusable module of content, or it becomes an update to an existing module of content. Everything we do should kind of work like a Lego brick. We have little ones, little tiny ones, which might answer very simple questions like, what's the date of the conference? December 12th. That's the tiniest possible thing you could have. It's just a little data factoid. And that will go into a group with other things like other things about the event, other things about the product, other things about the campaign. And then again, that will be like Russian dolls, or imagine if you're making Russian dolls out of Lego. So you get these larger and larger groups, but at each stage, they could be separated again, they could be built into something else, and you can grab the whole bunch and use it as a unit if you want to. So those two concepts of the Lego bits and the Russian dolls is the core of reusable content. We have to create it that way, and then we have to label it in the repository so that we as creators and managers can find it to reuse it when we need to.
Right. And so much of that, I'm curious now about the challenge. So much legacy content is not like that. It's like in big blobs of documents or PDF files or different CMS things. How I want to say excruciating, but how challenging is that to like extract this componentized content that you need to do proper personalization from, when you go into an existing organization? Is that easier these days than it was 10 years ago, or is it still an issue?
It's much easier than it was 10 years ago. There's the one technology that kind of really makes life easier. There's two. One is natural language processing for consistency and style. So if you're trying to bring content into the Lego world where it's reusable, it's got to fit together properly. So you can't have mismatched terminology on the top half of a page or the second half of the page. Or you can, but you don't want to. Right. So now there's tools on the market which can actually read language and say, well, stylistically you're off here. And last time you called it a button, and this time you're calling it an interface. So there are tools now that can read infinite number of pages and give you consistency reports on how you use language, how you use specific terms, and allow you to target your trouble spots and address them. The other one is natural language processing for categorization, because nobody likes tagging. I teach people tagging methodologies. I design tagging methodologies. I don't like having to figure out what are the tags I should put on this thing. Because once I'm done, once I'm done writing it, I want to be done. So I think most users, you can maybe get 2-3 tags out of them on any piece of writing that they're doing. So if you're in a system that's really complicated and you want richer tagging, there's systems that can now read the content itself and say, well, it sounds like you're talking about X, Y, and Z. Here's 10 tags. If the robot is wrong, you can tell them, okay, well, these 3 are wrong, but you can apply these 7. And that being able to do that not only to each piece of content I write, but throw it across 10,000 PDFs, 5,000 web pages, and 100,000 Word documents, and say, okay, where are all the stuff where we talk about windmills? Where are all the stuff where we talk about onboarding? Where's all the stuff we talk about, etc. And then allowing you to get your arms around this ocean of words. And actually start to group and categorize and then prioritize makes that whole process much easier.
Yeah, and that's part of the content strategy role, right? This newer role of somebody taking an enterprise-wide look at well, how do we say that, or how do we express that? And you mentioned, I think I gather from everything you've said to this point that you're not a tools first guy, like you're coming about vendors earlier and stuff. But it sounds like there are tools, I can't remember the name of it, but I've seen demos of a couple of those tools that do that contextual analysis as an author's creating. It'll say no, this is how we say that, or things like Pool Party or tools like that for the taxonomy and other tagging stuff. Is there a pretty good ecosystem of those tools now, or is that tell me a little bit about that, or
it's still a small niche. So which I like, honestly, it's more trouble for me when there's 50 vendors for something. Because then we have to kind of go through the whole triage of why this one and why not that one. When, as you said, I'm not really like a tools first guy. I have tools that I like because I think they work well. I like to have a few good tools which do me for most situations, but if not, I'll work with whatever the client has. If the client says we're working with AEM, we're working with AEM. If we're working with Sitecore or Drupal or whatever, I adapt myself to the situation. But I do have tools, especially like that, which often they don't have in-house yet because they're pretty new. So there's, Pool Party is one that comes up a lot. OntoText is a repository that sits underneath Pool Party. Also there's Stardog, which does a similar job. And then for the linguistics stuff, like the style thing, I find that I'm often working with Acrolinks. Which I like. And then for the customer journey mapping, I really like a platform it's a SaaS called UXpressia, UXPRESSIA. And UXpressia, what I like about them is they're not building pictures. It's not about making a PDF or a poster that it's about making a shareable cloud asset which multiple people can collaborate on, and you can update and link to reusable personas and reusable journeys and so on and so on. So those are tools that I'm working with on a regular basis. The CMS is the most variable one because there are thousands. Obviously in the big companies that comes down to a couple dozen. But that I'm still surprised by the amount of variation I get in the CMSs that we're working with.
One thing that there's a lot of fuss in parts of the tech world about is like headless CMSs and the whole decoupling of the CMS from the front end. And that must be a common thing in omnichannel. Are there any big enterprises that are doing a good job of that, of however they do it, whether it's a enterprise experience management thing or a headless thing where you're building your own APIs and connections and stuff? Is that world getting more complex and interesting? Or is there more than just picking whether it's Sitecore or AEM or something like that? Or
so I'll answer, but then I'll also give a caution that I don't want to drift too far into the tech side with this because it's so not the problem. it's so not the problem that is stopping people from doing these projects. And this is going back years, like whether it's tiny organizations or whether it's big multinationals, it's not technology that's really stopping them. It's organizing themselves, putting in processes, putting in content models, actually designing their content for purposes, and so that it has features and functions for different channels. That's what's holding people back. We run our stuff off of WordPress. And we do structured content, and we can do personalization, and we reuse across different deliverables, like different microsites, password protected, not password protected. You can do this with just about whatever tool you have. Yes, there are more sophisticated tools coming out there, and like at both of the Omnichannel X conferences, Cisco presented. And they are doing some amazing stuff with like artificial intelligence to judge next best action, next best thing to put under somebody's nose across channels and so on. And you absolutely you can do that. But I think that 80%, 90% of the market, and therefore I'm going to assume 89% of the listeners are going to be in the situation where they're not asking what color should I paint my Ferrari. They're going, how can I get my license? Like, how can I get into my first vehicle? So I like to focus on that bit. So yeah, the headless thing is useful. It's a very useful way to get all your stuff into one place and kind of centralize. But the fact is, and I always want to level set here, is that even when you're working with a kind of organization that I do, none of them have this, and I don't think any of them ever will. I always say everything in content is like laundry. It is never done. You can be more or less on top of it, but it is never done. No one has a holistic management of their end-to-end customer experience. No one has the 360-degree view on every touch point in their business. I've never seen it. I've only seen companies who are, let's say they've got a very large marketing organization and that they've managed to get that under wraps globally. But then you say, okay, well, what happens in support? And they go, I've not, or that you have like a support and marketing. At Omnichannel X, we had a support and marketing team that worked really well together. And technical documentation never came up. Yeah. And I won't name names, but I've seen some of the most sophisticated this, and then you ask about that, and there's a big gap. So I want to reassure people that wherever you are, you can move forward in this direction as long as you keep the fundamentals in mind.
Right. You're reminding me, I've seen Jared Spool present many times on the varying levels of UX maturity in an organization, and something very similar going on here, it sounds like, with, hey, Noz, I can't believe this. We're already coming up close to time. And I would love to continue forever, but I like to keep these around a half hour. But before we wrap up, I want to make sure, is there anything that's come up in this conversation or that's just on your mind about content strategy or omnichannel stuff that you want to share before we wrap up?
Well, there's, I think we've mentioned a couple times that we're coming up to the new conference next year. That's on omnichannelx.digital. People can check that out. We'll still be talking about last year's conference if you check it right now, but that is a good place to check out, and you can sign up for the newsletter. The other thing I wanted to talk about was I would say if you're into personalization or you want to personalize content, if you don't have a content model, and that's not, so just in case people misunderstand, content model is not your plan or your business model for content. It is, what are the types of information we're going to create? Do we create case studies? Do we create articles? Do we create how-tos? What are the types of content that you create? And that's not blog post, PDF, Word. It's what is the information type inside that? And then how does that break down? What bits would we change if we were doing a white paper for this audience or a white paper for that audience? Would we change the case studies? Would we change the examples? Would we change the business challenges? Decide what those things are, give them names. Because if you haven't done that, then you've already kind of failed the personalization. You've already admitted defeat, and all you're going to do is create a recommendation engine that says, do you want this white paper or that white paper? But you have no way to actually effectively manage two flavors of a white paper for two different audiences.
Right. So I love that. That's come up. I can't remember where, but this has come up like 3 or 4 times recently. This importance of naming and naming conventions and everybody being on the same page about these concepts you're talking about. Well, thanks.
Yep.
Yeah. Hey, one last thing, Noz. What's the best place for folks to follow? You mentioned the Omnichannel X conference, and I'll put all this in the show notes as well. But are social media or other websites that you like folks to check out?
Well, for work, I'm a big Twitter guy, and LinkedIn. If you want to actually kind of engage and chat and stuff. LinkedIn. I'm pretty easy to find. I have a pretty unique name. And then there's, of course, our website, urbinaconsulting.com, which is ripe for a relaunch. So I'm hoping to get a brand new visual identity out soon. Very excited about that. That's really the best 4 places to get a hold of me.
Great. And like I said, I'll put all that in the show notes. Well, thanks so much, Noz. I really appreciate the conversation.
My pleasure. My pleasure. Thanks for having me, Larry.
Thank you for listening. If you can think of a friend who might enjoy this episode, please share it with them. And please join us again for our next content strategy interview.